On May 6, 1937, a radio reporter named Herbert Morrison stood at a New Jersey airfield, ready to cover what should have been a boring, routine landing. What he witnessed instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. It's burst into flames? Get this, Charlie. It's fire and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh my. Get out of the way, please. In just 34 seconds, the largest flying machine ever built, the pride of Nazi Germany, transformed from a floating palace into a ball of fire falling from the sky. 97 people were on board that day. 36 of them would never go home. And here's what makes this tragedy even more haunting. After more than 85 years, we still don't know exactly what happened. Was it a hydrogen leak? Un Nazi-Saboteur? A fatal flaw in the airship's own skin? Or something far more sinister that Germany never wanted the world to know? This is the story of the Hindenburg. And I promise you, it's stranger than you think. But before we understand what destroyed the Hindenburg, we need to understand something far more fundamental. We need to understand humanity's obsession with flying. You see, for thousands of years, humans looked up at the sky and felt one overwhelming emotion: jealousy. Birds could fly. We couldn't. And that drove people absolutely crazy. In the 1500s, people would watch birds soaring through the clouds and think, why not us? What makes them so special? And some people decided to find out the hard way. In 1507, a man named John Damien in Scotland came up with what he thought was a brilliant plan. He covered his arms with chicken feathers, real chicken feathers. Then he climbed to the roof of a castle, spread his arms wide, and jumped. He started flapping his arms like a bird, absolutely convinced he was about to soar into the sky. He wasn't. He crashed straight into the ground and broke multiple bones. But here's the incredible part. When people asked him what went wrong, do you know what he said? He said, "The problem was I used chicken feathers. If I had used eagle feathers, I would have flown." He wasn't joking. He genuinely believed that. John Damien wasn't alone. Throughout history, countless people jumped off towers, walls, and cliffs with feathers, kites, and homemade wings strapped to their bodies. Most of them died. The rest got seriously injured. But humans never stopped trying. Eventually, scientists realized there were only two ways humans could ever fly. First, make yourself lighter than air, like a balloon floating upward. Second, generate enough power to push yourself into the sky, like a rocket or an engine. The airplanes and helicopters you see today use the second method. They're heavy, but their engines are powerful enough to overcome gravity. But the story of airships, the story of the Hindenburg, that's the first method. Making yourself lighter than air. And that story begins with two brothers and a pile of burning laundry. In the 1770s, in France, two brothers named Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier were about to change history by accident. One day, Joseph was watching someone dry clothes over a fire. He noticed something strange. The heat from the fire was making the fabric rise upward, almost like it wanted to float away. This gave him an idea, a crazy, brilliant idea. What if you could trap hot air inside a container? Would the container float? He built a small box from thin wood, covered it with lightweight cloth, and put burning paper inside. The box started rising into the air. Joseph immediately ran to his brother. "You have to see this." Together, they built bigger and bigger models. On December 14, 1782, they tested a full-size version. They burned wool and hay inside it, and the lifting force was so powerful that they lost control. Their creation flew for 2 kilometers before coming down. The next year, in 1783, they demonstrated their invention to King Louis XVI himself at the Palace of Versailles. To prove it was safe for living creatures, they put a duck and a hen inside the balloon. The king was impressed. He gave them permission to test it with humans. And just like that, the hot air balloon was born. Jacques-Étienne became the first human being to fly in a balloon. Humanity had finally conquered the sky. But balloons had a problem. You couldn't control where they went. The wind decided your direction, not you. You were basically a passenger on a floating basket, hoping the wind would take you where you wanted to go. Scientists needed to find a way to steer balloons, to turn them into actual vehicles. And that's where a German boy with an impossibly long name enters our story. Ferdinand Adolf Heinrich August Graf von Zeppelin. Yes, that was his actual name. And he would become the father of the airship. As a young man, Zeppelin traveled to America during the American Civil War. There, he witnessed something that changed his life. The Union Army was using observation balloons for military surveillance, floating high above battlefields to spot enemy movements. Zeppelin was fascinated. He couldn't stop thinking about what balloons could become if they were properly developed. By 1874, while serving in the German military, Zeppelin wrote down a revolutionary idea in his diary. What if, instead of one gas bag, you used multiple gas bags inside a rigid frame? You could build something enormous. Something that could be steered. Something that could carry passengers and cargo across continents. He called it a dirigible airship. But turning that dream into reality would take decades of failure, heartbreak, and near bankruptcy. In 1891, at the age of 52, Zeppelin resigned from the army. He was done with military life. He wanted to focus entirely on building airships. He gathered a team of engineers. They designed an aluminum framework that could hold multiple gas bags. By 1898, Zeppelin had secured enough investment to build his first airship. He called it LZ-1. On July 2, 1900, LZ-1 took its first flight. It stayed in the air for 20 minutes. It was a success. And then it crashed during landing. Zeppelin didn't give up. He started repairs immediately, but he was running out of money. He did something desperate. He mortgaged his wife's personal assets to raise more funds. By 1905, he completed LZ-2. But before it could even fly, a critical control component broke. The airship never left the ground. A year of repairs later, in 1906, Zeppelin tried again. This time, the airship flew. But during testing, strong winds overwhelmed the controls. They lost the airship completely. Zeppelin salvaged the remaining parts and built LZ-3. He needed to prove to the German military that his airships could work. The military set a condition. The airship needed to stay airborne for at least 24 hours. It failed the test. Still, Zeppelin refused to quit. He built LZ-4. This one was better. It flew beautifully. And then, one night, a violent storm hit. LZ-4 was torn from its moorings and destroyed in a massive explosion. Years of work, his wife's money, multiple airships, all gone. At this point, most people would have given up. Zeppelin was in his 60s. He had failed publicly, repeatedly, humiliatingly. But here's what makes his story remarkable. Around this same time, in 1903, the Wright brothers had completed their first successful airplane flight in America. The world was watching the race to conquer the sky. And people started noticing Zeppelin, not for his failures, but for his refusal to stop trying. Donations started coming in from across Germany. People admired his persistence. Investors who had written him off began funding him again. Zeppelin improved LZ-3. In 1908, despite terrible weather, the test flights succeeded. The German government officially accepted his airship. Ferdinand von Zeppelin had finally done it. Over the next decade, he continued improving his designs. His airships grew larger, more reliable, more impressive. The word Zeppelin became synonymous with airship. But Zeppelin himself would never see the greatest airship ever built. He died in 1917, 1 year before World War I ended. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from maintaining military aircraft. Airships, which had been used primarily for warfare, suddenly had no purpose, or so it seemed. This is when Dr. Hugo Eckener enters our story. After Zeppelin's death, Eckener took control of the Zeppelin Company. And he had a revolutionary idea. What if airships weren't just for war? What if ordinary people could fly in them? Commercial air travel, passenger flights across oceans, luxury journeys through the sky. It sounded like science fiction. Eckener made it reality. In 1924, Eckener personally piloted LZ-126 on an historic journey. More than 8,000 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean. 80 hours of flight. When the airship landed in America, crowds cheered and called it the Angel of Peace. A machine built for destruction was now carrying hope. Eckener built larger and better airships. LZ-127, called the Graf Zeppelin, circumnavigated the entire globe in 1929. It became the most famous aircraft in the world. And then came the Hindenburg, LZ-29, the largest aircraft ever built, 245 meters long. Compare that to a Boeing 747 and you'll realize how massive this thing was. The Titanic, which was once the world's largest ship, was only 24 meters longer than the Hindenburg. This wasn't an aircraft. This was a flying ocean liner. To understand why the Hindenburg mattered, you need to understand what flying was like in 1937. Airplanes existed, sure, but they were loud, cramped, terrifying metal tubes that vibrated constantly and could barely cross a country without stopping for fuel. Their top speed was impressive, 700 or 800 kilometers per hour, but the experience was miserable. Airships were different. Yes, they were slower, about 100 kilometers per hour. But speed wasn't the point. Imagine floating across the Atlantic Ocean in a luxury hotel. Private sleeping cabins with real beds. A dining room serving gourmet meals prepared by professional chefs. A lounge with an actual grand piano where passengers gathered for entertainment. A reading and writing room for those who wanted quiet. Windows everywhere, massive windows, offering panoramic views of the ocean thousands of feet below. No turbulence, no deafening engines. Just smooth, silent, majestic flight. This wasn't transportation. This was an experience. A one-way ticket cost $400, which is about $8,000 in today's money. Only the wealthiest people in the world could afford it. Celebrities, business tycoons, European royalty. And they expected perfection. The Hindenburg delivered. For over a year, it made 63 successful flights, carrying 2,700 passengers across the Atlantic without a single injury. It seemed invincible, but behind the luxury, there was a secret. A dangerous secret that the German engineers knew about but couldn't fix. The Hindenburg was filled with hydrogen, and hydrogen is essentially a flying bomb waiting for a spark. Here's where politics enters the story, and where things get very dark. The Hindenburg was originally designed to use helium. Helium is perfect for airships. It's lighter than air, so it provides lift. But unlike hydrogen, helium doesn't burn. You could throw a lit match into pure helium and nothing would happen. So why didn't they use helium? Because America said no. In 1937, the United States controlled almost the entire world's helium supply. And the American government looked at Nazi Germany, looked at Hitler, looked at those giant swastikas painted on the Hindenburg's tail, and made a decision. Absolutely not. We're not giving you anything. Dr. Hugo Eckener was desperate. He personally traveled to Washington and begged American officials to sell Germany helium. He knew hydrogen was dangerous. He understood the risks better than anyone. His requests were denied, every single time. So the Germans had no choice. They redesigned the entire airship to use hydrogen instead. They added every safety measure they could think of. Crew members wore special shoes designed to prevent static sparks. There was a pressurized smoking room with an airlock, completely sealed from the hydrogen. Only one electric lighter was allowed on the entire airship. Matches were strictly forbidden. For a year, these precautions worked. But hydrogen is hydrogen. It only takes one spark, one tiny invisible spark. And eventually, luck runs out. Now, I need to tell you about the man who built the Hindenburg, and why some people believe the Nazis themselves may have wanted it destroyed. Hugo Eckener wasn't just an engineer. He was one of the few people in Germany who openly criticized Adolf Hitler. During Hitler's rule, speaking against the Nazis was essentially a death sentence. People disappeared for far less. But Eckener refused to stay silent. He publicly opposed the regime. In 1933, when the Nazi Party came to power, Hitler tried to have Eckener arrested. But Eckener had a powerful protector. The German president at the time was a man named Paul von Hindenburg. Yes, the same Hindenburg the airship was named after. President Hindenburg blocked the arrest and saved Eckener's life. 3 years later, in 1936, when the world's largest airship was completed, Hitler's propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels approached Eckener with a demand. Name the airship after Hitler, the Adolf Hitler. That's what Goebbels wanted painted on the side of the world's greatest aircraft. Eckener refused. Instead, he named it after the man who had saved him from arrest, Hindenburg. This infuriated the Nazis, but they couldn't do anything about it. Eckener was too famous, too respected internationally. Arresting him now would be a public relations disaster. So they found other ways to undermine him. Even before the disaster, when the Hindenburg took its first flight, the Nazi government tried to use it for propaganda. They forced their people into positions of authority on the airship. Many of these Nazi appointees weren't qualified. They didn't understand Eckener's strict safety standards. On one of the early flights, the Hindenburg almost crashed due to incompetence. The airship was badly damaged. There was a massive argument between Eckener and the Nazi propaganda ministry. This is why some historians believe the Nazis might have sabotaged their own airship, to destroy Eckener's reputation, to eliminate a symbol of his success. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you what happened on that terrible day. May 3rd, 1937, Frankfurt, Germany. The Hindenburg departed on its first North American voyage of the season. On board were 36 passengers and 61 crew members, 97 souls in total. Among them was the Döner family, a mother, a father, and their 3 children, including 14-year-old Irene. They were heading to America to visit family. Irene was excited about the journey, about seeing her relatives, about the adventure of crossing an ocean in a flying palace. Among them was Werner Franz, a 14-year-old cabin boy. This was his dream job, working on the world's most famous airship. He couldn't believe his luck. Among them was Captain Max Pruss, one of the most experienced airship commanders alive. He had flown millions of miles without a single incident. He was confident, professional, and completely trusted by his crew. None of them knew they were living their final normal hours. The Atlantic crossing was uneventful but slow. Strong headwinds pushed against the Hindenburg, adding nearly 12 hours to the journey. Captain Pruss pushed forward anyway. He knew hundreds of journalists and spectators were waiting at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. By the evening of May 6th, the Hindenburg finally approached New Jersey. But the weather had turned dangerous. Thunderstorms, lightning, heavy rain, dark clouds covering the sky. Captain Pruss circled for hours, waiting for conditions to improve. By 7 p.m., the storms had cleared enough. Captain Pruss made his decision. We land now. He brought the massive airship down to about 200 feet. The ground crew below prepared to receive the landing ropes. This was how airships landed. Ropes were dropped to workers on the ground who would pull the aircraft down and anchor it. On the ground, Herbert Morrison was recording his report for radio. Here it comes, ladies and gentlemen. And what a sight it is, a thrilling one, a marvelous sight. The sun is striking the windows of the observation deck and sparkling like glittering jewels. Cameramen were filming. Spectators were cheering. This was history happening in real time. The captain made a sharp turn to align the aircraft with the wind direction. The ropes dropped. The ground crew rushed to grab them. Everything seemed perfect. And then, at 7:25 p.m., everything changed. The people on the ground saw it first. A small flutter of fabric near the tail fin. Something wasn't right. The outer covering seemed to be rippling in a strange way, as if something was pressing against it from inside. Then came a flash. A tiny flame appeared near the top of the airship. For a split second, it looked almost harmless. A candle flame on a giant balloon. Then the flame touched the hydrogen, and the Hindenburg became hell. The fire spread faster than anyone could comprehend. The entire rear section erupted in flames within 2 seconds. The massive tail dropped as the hydrogen burned away, tilting the airship at a horrifying angle. Herbert Morrison's voice transformed from calm reporter to pure, raw terror. It's burst into flames. It's burst into flames and it's falling. It's crashing. Watch it, watch it. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Inside the Hindenburg, passengers faced an impossible choice. Stay inside and burn, or jump from 200 feet and hope you survive the fall. Many jumped. Some aimed for the soft sand of the airfield. Others just jumped, not caring where they landed, knowing that anything was better than burning alive. The airship's skeleton collapsed as each hydrogen cell exploded in sequence. The great flying machine fell in on itself like a dying beast, its aluminum frame twisting and melting in the inferno. Oh, the humanity, and all the passengers screaming around here. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honest, it's just laying there, a mass of smoking wreckage. 34 seconds. That's all it took. 34 seconds to destroy 5 years of construction. 34 seconds to end the age of the airship. 34 seconds to kill 36 people. When the flames died down, rescuers rushed into the twisted, burning wreckage. What they found was somehow both horrifying and miraculous. Of the 97 people aboard, 62 survived. How? How does anyone survive a hydrogen explosion? Several things saved lives that day. The Hindenburg was only 200 feet off the ground when the fire started. That's high enough to kill you if you land wrong, but it's low enough to survive if you land right. The fire burned upward. Hydrogen is lighter than air, so when it burns, the flames go up, not down. Passengers on the lower decks had precious extra seconds to escape before the flames reached them. And the ground crew, those incredibly brave men, they ran directly into the burning wreckage. They didn't hesitate. They saw people trapped inside, and they ran toward the fire to pull them out. Some survival stories seem almost impossible. Werner Franz, the 14-year-old cabin boy, was trapped inside the burning airship with no way out. He was about to die, and then a water tank directly above him burst. The water drenched him completely, head to toe, protecting him from the flames. He walked out of the inferno with only minor burns. Joseph Spah was a professional acrobat. When the fire started, he didn't panic. He hung from a window ledge, watching, waiting, timing his moment. When the airship was low enough, he dropped 40 feet, tucked into a roll, and landed safely. His professional training saved his life. Captain Max Pruss survived, but suffered terrible burns to his face that would scar him for life. He spent the rest of his years defending the Hindenburg safety record, never accepting that the airship was fundamentally flawed. He couldn't let go, but others weren't so fortunate. The Donner family lost their father, and they lost their 14-year-old daughter Irene. She was the same age as Werner Franz, the cabin boy who survived. Two teenagers, same age, same airship, same disaster. One walked away, one never came home. Captain Ernst Lehmann, one of the most legendary airship commanders in history, walked out of the wreckage on his own 2 feet. Witnesses thought he would be fine. He was talking. He was conscious, but his burns were too severe. Internal damage that nobody could see. He died the next day in the hospital. His last words were reportedly, "I don't understand it." And honestly, after 85 years of investigation, we still don't fully understand it either. The investigation started immediately. American investigators, German investigators, both nations desperate to find an answer, and perhaps more desperate to make sure the blame didn't fall on them. They interviewed every survivor. They examined every piece of wreckage. They analyzed weather data, structural diagrams, maintenance records, crew testimonies. And after months of work, they came to a frustrating conclusion. We don't know for certain. The official reports agreed that hydrogen ignited, obviously. But what caused the ignition? That remained a mystery. 3 main theories emerged. The first theory was sabotage. And honestly, it made a lot of sense. Think about it. The Hindenburg was the ultimate Nazi symbol. Giant swastikas on its tail, used for propaganda flights over Germany. A floating advertisement for Hitler's regime. Plenty of people wanted to destroy it. In 1962, a researcher named A.A. Holing published a book pointing the finger at a specific crew member, Eric Spiel, a rigger who had access to the gas cells. According to Holing, Spiel's girlfriend was an anti-Nazi activist. She hated everything Hitler stood for. The theory suggests Spiel placed a small incendiary device inside one of the gas cells, timed to explode after landing, when the airship would be empty and no one would get hurt. But the landing was delayed by 12 hours because of weather. By the time the Hindenburg reached Lakehurst, Spiel's timer went off while passengers were still aboard. An act of political protest became mass murder. It's a compelling theory. There's just one problem. Eric Spiel died in the fire. He never confessed. No bomb fragments were ever found. The evidence is entirely circumstantial. We can't prove it and we can't disprove it. Some historians even believe the Nazis themselves sabotaged the airship to destroy Hugo Eckener's reputation, to eliminate a symbol built by a man who dared to criticize Hitler. Hitler's government had already tried to arrest Eckener once. They had already tried to force him to name the airship after Hitler. They had already put unqualified Nazi loyalists in positions of power on the airship. Is it really impossible to believe they would destroy it? Most modern historians consider sabotage unlikely, but no one can rule it out completely. The second theory pointed to static electricity. The Hindenburg had passed through a storm. The outer covering may have become electrically charged, building up static electricity as it flew through the clouds. When the wet landing ropes touched the ground, they created a path for electricity. A spark could have jumped through the fabric and ignited hydrogen leaking from a damaged gas cell. The captain's sharp turn just before landing might have stressed the structure, causing a wire to snap and puncture a gas cell. Hydrogen would have leaked out, and when the static discharged, it would have ignited the gas. This theory has the most scientific support, but it still relies on a chain of events that's impossible to verify. The third theory focused on lightning. The weather was bad that day. Some witnesses reported seeing lightning in the area. Could a lightning strike have ignited the hydrogen? It's possible, but most investigators don't think so. The timing and location don't quite match what witnesses observed. And then, in 1997, a retired NASA scientist named Addison Bain proposed something that changed everything. What if the hydrogen wasn't the main problem? What if the Hindenburg was destroyed by its own skin? Bain analyzed samples of the Hindenburg's outer covering and discovered something alarming. The fabric was coated with a mixture of iron oxide and aluminum powder. You know what else uses iron oxide and aluminum powder? rocket fuel, and thermite. According to Bain, static electricity didn't ignite the hydrogen first. It ignited the covering itself. The entire outer skin of the Hindenburg was essentially painted with explosive material. This would explain why the fire spread so impossibly fast, racing across the entire surface rather than burning from a single point. This would explain the strange silvery flames visible in the footage. This would explain why the fire moved the way it did, rippling across the fabric like the fabric itself was burning. Bain's theory has critics. They point out that the covering had been exposed to static electricity countless times without catching fire. If it was really that flammable, it should have burned long before. But his research forced everyone to reconsider what actually killed those 36 people. Maybe it wasn't just the hydrogen. Maybe it was a combination of everything. So what's the truth? Honestly, after 85 years, the truth is we don't know for certain. The most likely explanation is that everything went wrong at once. Hydrogen was leaking from a damaged gas cell, possibly caused by the sharp turn or a snapped wire. The outer covering was charged with static electricity from flying through the storm. When the landing ropes hit the ground, a spark jumped into a pocket of leaked hydrogen and flammable fabric. And 34 seconds later, 36 people were dead. Not one cause. A perfect storm of failures. Politics that denied them safe helium. Engineering that coated the airship in flammable material. Weather that charged it with electricity. Bad luck that put a spark in the wrong place at the wrong moment. All of it coming together in one terrible instant. The Hindenburg disaster didn't just destroy one airship. It destroyed an entire industry. Within weeks, passenger airship travel was dead. The Hindenburg's sister ship was grounded and eventually scrapped. The Zeppelin company never carried another commercial passenger. And here's why the Hindenburg had such an outsized impact compared to other aviation disasters. This one was filmed. It was recorded. Herbert Morrison's horrified voice was broadcast to millions of people across America and Europe. For the first time in history, people witnessed a disaster in real time. They saw the fireball. They heard the screaming. They watched people jump to their deaths. They heard a reporter break down crying on air. That image burned itself into public consciousness in a way no disaster had before. It didn't matter that 62 people survived, which is actually remarkable for such a catastrophic event. It didn't matter that airplanes at the time were statistically more dangerous than airships. The Hindenburg became the symbol of aviation terror, and hydrogen became synonymous with death. By the 1940s, airships were finished. On one hand, the Hindenburg disaster had destroyed public confidence. People were terrified to fly in them. On the other hand, airplanes were improving rapidly. They were getting faster, more reliable, cheaper to operate. A passenger airplane could fly at 700 or 800 kilometers per hour. An airship could barely manage 100. It was difficult to obtain helium gas because America still controlled the supply. And in bad weather, airships were far more vulnerable than airplanes. The age of the airship ended that day in New Jersey. Our generation never traveled in these magnificent machines. We never experienced what it felt like to cross an ocean in a floating palace, flying slowly at low altitude, with massive windows offering views that today's airplane passengers can only dream of. That experience is lost to history. Or is it? Here's something most people don't know. Airships might be coming back. In 2017, a UK-based company called Hybrid Air Vehicles conducted test flights for a giant airship called Airlander 10. At the time of its testing, it was considered the world's largest aircraft in development. The technology has changed. Today, helium is much easier to obtain. The supply isn't controlled by any single country. Modern airships can be built with non-flammable materials and advanced safety systems. And here's the interesting part. Climate change is making people reconsider airships. Airships produce roughly 1/10 of the carbon emissions that airplanes produce. They're far more fuel efficient. They fly almost silently, without the deafening roar of jet engines. Companies are estimating that by the early 2030s, commercial airship flights could begin again. Imagine that. Almost 100 years after the Hindenburg disaster, we might finally return to the skies in floating palaces. Will it happen? Only time will tell. But the dream that Ferdinand von Zeppelin wrote in his diary in 1874, the dream that Hugo Eckener fought so hard to protect, the dream that 36 people died for on May 6, 1937, that dream might not be dead after all. On that terrible day in New Jersey, 97 people boarded the world's largest flying machine for what should have been a routine landing. Among them was a family taking their daughter to visit her grandmother. 14-year-old Irene Donner never made it. Among them was a teenage cabin boy living his dream. 14-year-old Werner Franz walked out of the fire, saved by a burst water tank. Among them was a captain who had flown millions of miles without incident. Max Pruss survived but carried the scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of his life. 34 seconds changed everything. 36 people died that day. 13 passengers, 22 crew members, one ground worker who ran into the flames to save strangers he had never met. They died because America wouldn't sell helium to the Nazis. They died because engineers coated the airship in flammable material. They died because a storm charged the fabric with electricity. They died because sometimes everything goes wrong at once. We may never know exactly what sparked those flames. Maybe it was static electricity. Maybe it was sabotage. Maybe it was the paint. Maybe it was all of them together. What we know for certain is this: the Hindenburg changed aviation forever. It killed the airship era for nearly a century. It gave the world one of its first shared media traumas. And it left us with a mystery that still haunts historians more than 85 years later. But Ferdinand von Zeppelin's dream refused to die. Hugo Eckener's vision of peaceful air travel refused to be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, in the coming years, we'll see airships return to our skies. Not as relics of the past, but as hope for the future. 97 people flew that day. 36 never came home. The Hindenburg, the largest aircraft ever built, destroyed in 34 seconds. And we're still asking what really happened.